Hey, what is poppin', everyone? So today we'll be talking about transportation, and the question we'll be answering is, why is transportation so bad in the US? For those of you who have been to the US and have also been to the East Asian countries, so China, Japan, Taiwan, Korea, you can tell that the United States is super far behind. But if the US is number one in the world in terms of GDP, in terms of universities, Nobel Prizes, all kinds of stuff, if the US is so good at so many things, why is it so bad at transportation? So today we'll be exploring the answer to that question. And before I directly answer that question, I'll give y'all a little bit of background on transportation in the US. So transportation is not a new concept in the US. Before, we used to have horses, right? People used to ride horses, and then that evolved into wagons, and then eventually the first automobiles were invented in the US. So for those of you who know Ford, Henry Ford was one of the most prominent founders or contributors to the transportation industry around the world too, right? So the US started inventing cars really well, automobiles, and then I think before that or around the same time, I don't know, trains were also being invented. So the US had a dilemma. Should it be more car focused, or should it be more collective train focused? And that was a hard question to answer, because the US is very big, right? So it's very huge. It's not like Korea or Japan, where it's possible to implement a transportation system throughout the country. In the US, the cities were very spread out, and the US is just huge. So it was impossible to implement a transportation system across all of the US. And it was way cheaper for cars, but people to have individual cars. But on top of that, the idea of individualism was very strong in the US. The idea of an individual culture, of freedom of expression, freedom of religion, that was one of the core principles of the United States. So families ended up wanting to have their own individualistic transportation freedom. They didn't want to rely on trains and wait for them. It was just much better to have cars. And at the same time, although it was cheaper for the individual to ride public transportation, at that time, the US was one of the richest countries in the world. It might have been second or third place. And so the people in the US, each individual person had a lot of money to spend. They didn't need to save for the trains. They had enough money to get their own cars. So because of that, the people voted for government officials that would implement they would spend more money on highways and road infrastructure for their cars than spend money on public transportation. So besides core cities like New York and San Francisco and Chicago, a lot of the cities in the US did not have good public transportation, and instead people relied on cars. People relied on getting on the highway, getting on the road, and that just became a culture of the US, and it became really widespread. And before you knew it, everyone in the US really only thought, hey, driving a car is the only solution. So because of that culture, that still persists into today. The US has become very behind in terms of transportation because there's just so much more work to do in terms of getting rid of cars and then switching to a transportation focused country. And we don't have enough politicians that emphasize public transportation over individual automobiles. And so I don't see the US becoming a strong public transportation focused country anytime soon. But the good thing is that certain cities are making huge advancements. Like, for example, I think California, a lot of public transportation is being innovated, and I think it's a bright future for certain places in the US, but as a whole, I don't think the US will be connected anytime soon. But thank you all for tuning in to today's podcast, and I will see y'all next time.